welcome to the Locker Room. I'm one of your hosts, Justin Ham, and thank you for joining us as we journey through tough issues that guys face as athletes and as humans. Today's episode is going to be just a little bit different. I'm going to be doing this one solo, and I just want to take some time to share some thoughts that God has been showing me in my life over the last few months as I've taken on a couple new roles as a new husband, now as a stepfather, as well as a coach, and constantly learning how to be the best version of a coach I can be through understanding that it's more than just sports. So I want to just say, I'm excited to have you join me as we're navigating some of these questions around the ideas of guys, God, and doesn't matter, specifically questions that I wrestle with as a coach and as I think I just said, a new step parent, new husband, and person working in full-time ministry. So for those of you who maybe have listened in the past, you know that myself and Vincenzo Pepe run this. Vincenzo is the area director from the Hudson Valley area of New York State, and I am the area director of the Capital District as well as the Adirondack region of New York. So the two of us together, usually like every other week, one of us releases a podcast. So last week was Vincenzo, this week is me. Next week will be Vincenzo. So that's typically the rhythm. Every other week, one of us releases one. Typically, I'm one who Vincenzo has a different area of focus. His is on, it's still within the area of sports and the locker room and things like that. But he'll have more conversations with male, female, anything like that. My focus is typically on guys, by guys, for guys. That's typically how my wing of the locker room typically goes. So this week, though, I don't have a guest, as I mentioned in the intro. So I'm going to be trying to, just share some thoughts, some things that I've been thinking a lot about, and hopefully they can be some of encouraging thoughts to you folks as if you're listening. So um, just want to say on the front end that this probably won't be your typical 30 to 40 minute pod. Maybe 20, maybe 15, 20, 25, maybe 40. I don't know. I just don't know how I could see myself having a conversation with myself for 40 minutes, but I guess we'll find out together. Um, I'm just excited about this opportunity to just share kind of my heart. It's something that I know a lot of people might find uncomfortable, and in full transparency, I'm a little apprehensive. I've started this 3 different times and I've ended up stopping it 3 different times because for whatever reason I felt, it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right thing to say. It wasn't the right. I didn't feel like it was something that, was from wasn't something that I felt that was ready to go to air, truthfully. But after some time, I've been thinking a lot about it and praying a little bit about it. Ironically, um, just had some outside influence kind of speak into me a little bit. But I want to take some time to talk about this idea of the role a coach could play as a guy. So again, know that from my heart is coming at it as a male coach. The role that a male coach might have on an athlete's life, especially if that athlete grew up in a home without a dad. Father's Day is just around the corner. Father's Day, I believe, is June 14th, I think. I should know that now because, like I mentioned earlier, it's one of my new roles. 15th. It's the 5th. It's a 15th. It's June 15th. So it's 2 weeks away. And it just got me thinking that I'm not suggesting that a coach is a surrogate dad. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that that is their job. I'm not saying that is something that is expected of them. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am hoping to unpack in our next few minutes of this podcast is the idea that if a kid grew up in a home without a dad, the role of a coach is always important, but it's even more important for that kid. And I say this as a kid who grew up in a home without a dad. I grew up in a loving home with a great mom who did everything she could to try to fill both roles. She, did the typical mom thing, and she would go outside. She would teach. She would try to help me get better at sports. She would, do everything she could to make sure my life was as normal, quote, as possible, unquote. But the reality is I didn't have a male figure in my home day in and day out as a dad. So when I got older, for me, I knew at an early age I loved athletics. I loved competing. God gave me a natural skill set. God gave me the ability to want to work hard. God gave me certain physical gifts that allowed me to do okay at the sports I chose to play. So it made sense that as I got older that I would play those sports. And I was fortunate to be able to play for some really godly men um, along the way. Obviously, not everybody I played for was a coach, but I had the unique privilege of going to a Christian middle school, Christian high school, and a Christian college. And at those levels, at those places, the coaches that I had were all believers who loved the Lord, which was awesome. It was unique. I never got cussed at, never got screamed at. Well, actually, that's not true. I would get screamed at, but I never got cussed at. I never got devalued as a human. I got coached hard in some of those places, but for the most part, I knew it always came from a place of love. There was a couple times where, and we'll unpack that in a little while, where I wasn't so sure. But for the most part, the majority of my experience playing sports, I was able to play for some really great guys, some of which I still get to come in contact with even today, and some that I don't, and I've lost touch with, but I'm always thankful for the role that they played in my life. But I wanted to just spend some time on this concept that as a coach, which is what I am now, I'm the high school boys varsity basketball coach at Middleburg Central School in upstate New York. There are kids on my team that, like me, their dad isn't necessarily in their life. So what I am intentionally trying to do is I want to be the kind of coach to them that I wish I had when I was their age. And it's taken me some time to think about that. It's taken me some time to wrap my head around that. And actually, ironically, it's my wife who kind of challenged me on that a little bit. And I think that's why God intended for men and women to do life together, is because they see things a little bit differently than I do. Men do. Women see things differently than men. Men see things differently than women. And that's why together they're so powerful. But that's what ended up happening. It was not that long ago. My wife and I were talking, and I was doing the typical coach thing, and I was just venting some frustration about, I don't remember exactly what it was, but she basically challenged me with, yeah, that's the role that, because I was complaining about something. I was talking about how, I don't know, truthfully, I was probably playing a little bit of a victim, probably blaming some bad habit on something that I didn't need to, because that's what we typically do, is we, make excuses. So I was making probably some excuse, and she called me on it. And then it led to a conversation about exactly this topic. How do you coach when coaching, it's more important than just winning and losing? And if you've been listening to our podcast, last time I had one, I was talking with Greg Johns, about that, someone who has almost 30 years of coaching experience. But I want to take it to another level, right? Because what I want to be clear on the front end is I'm, again, not suggesting that as a coach, it is our role to be their fathers. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that the opportunity that we have as a coach to be a strong male presence in these kids' lives, whether they have a father figure in the home or not, that's really, really important. And it's something that I sometimes lose sight of. And I grew up as one of those kids who didn't have a father in their home. So what I wanted to do is just share over the next few minutes some things that I think are have been incredibly helpful to me, and some practical applications I think that will help moving forward. Maybe for me specifically, and in the process of them helping me, in turn, maybe they'll help you. If you're listening on the podcast, I apologize. I'm dealing a little bit with um, my throat's a little sore, so I keep taking sips. So occasionally you'll hear me cut out, but I assure you I'm still here. So all that to say is this. So yes, I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a home with a single mom, and I was the kind of kid that I was a people pleaser from the beginning. I wanted my mom to be proud of me. I wanted people to be proud of me. And over time, there's a lot of psychological damage that can be done when your entire focus of living is making other people proud of you or pleased in you. And then you start becoming a people pleaser, and then your motivations are all off and all of that. But that's who I was. So the older I got, the better I got at sports. I found myself clinging to the praise that I would get from a coach. If one of my coaches told me that I had a good day, that filled me up to the brim and I could run through a wall for them just off physical praise. The flip side is also true. If, I had a bad day, or if they could tell me 10 positive things and that one negative thing, it would just ruin me. I was that insecure athlete that lived and died by whatever the feedback was from their coach. And interestingly enough, even though there was most of it was positive, it was those little nuggets of negativity or the little nuggets of criticism there. It just crushed me. Now, does that mean I shouldn't have had those nuggets of criticism? No, of course not. But my perspective as a kid was off. And sometimes maybe the approach that the coach had, in fairness, was off. But that's something that I just want to say right off the front of the bat is that's who I was. I was that people pleaser, wanted coaches to like me, felt that I learned early that the better I was at something or the better I performed, the more praise I got, kind of like and it just became almost like classically conditioning where if I did well, I got more praise, and if I got more praise, I felt better about myself, so I would just do whatever I had to do to get the praise. Um, which it could be effective. I mean, I was a decently successful high school student athlete. I played college sports, so I mean, it worked for me to a degree. But psychologically, though, what it did is this was something that I can't even really necessarily put on the coach. This was more of my internal thing that I now later in life have realized is that I can connect the fact that as someone without a dad in the home, any kind of male authority figure is somebody that intrinsically needed their approval. And even if, I never acted like it, I would crave it. And I didn't know how to vocalize it. I didn't know how to talk with them about it. I didn't know how to have those conversations. But I let my coach's encouragement or criticism define me. And that's not on them. It was my issue as a high school athlete that I had to learn to come to grips with, and I wish I had come to grips with it sooner than I did. But thankfully, I was able to identify it later in life, but I was able to identify it. But with that being said, as coaches, how do we handle that? Right? How do we handle those conversations? And we can't go in there assuming anything, right? Like if my coaches were to assume well, this kid doesn't have a dad, Justin doesn't have a dad, so I can't tell him the full truth, then they're doing themselves a disservice. So again, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to change and cater the way we coach because certain kids have different home styles or different backgrounds. I'm not saying that. But I think in general, what I am saying is, as coaches, we should be trying to coach the whole person, whether they're, from a single parent home, multi-blended family, whether they're from adopted, whatever it might be, their whole person matters. I felt like as an athlete, the coach only cared about what I could do. And fortunately, I was good. So that helped because I was able to score a lot of points in basketball. I was able to, I was a goalkeeper in soccer. I did well. I don't feel like looking back on it that my coaches cared as much. I'm not saying they didn't care at all, but they didn't care as much about the rest of me. The focus was on the physical. Was I able to perform? Was I able to do this, and this well? And if I could do this, and this well, that's really all that they cared about. That's what I thought. Doesn't make it true, but that's what I thought as a teenager, as a high school athlete, college athlete. So, what does that mean now? So in the current role I'm in, I've been a varsity coach now for head coach for 2 years. I'm going into my third year. We got the off season coming up. We got summer league and all of this. This is a reminder for me because I too find myself sometimes focusing mainly on the physical side of what can these players do. This goes back to the conversation I had with my wife. My wife said to me something that got me thinking. Again, I don't want to go into the specifics because she's not here to weigh in on her side of the story. But the gist of it was her and I were having a conversation. I was super focused on the physical side of some of these athletes, and she called me out on it. Because my wife's a special ed teacher. Her perspective is so much more healthy than mine. It's so much more on, well, rather than limiting them to people who like what are they good at? Like looking, she's so good at looking for ways that other people who might who what's how do I want to say this? She's so good at looking for what people are good at versus pigeonholing, allowing them to be pigeonholed for certain things that society says they need to be good at. So what I mean by that is like from an athletic standpoint, let's say somebody's a really good three-point shooter, right? That's something that society right now values. I value it. Our offense is kind of like a high volume three-point shooting team. So if you're a good three-point shooter, you influence our chances of winning better, more, because that's something you do that helps our offense and is in our style of play. But what's something that my wife's helped me realize is there might be kids on my team that maybe they're not the best three-point shooter, but maybe, fill in the blank. They're really great at this, or that. She's shaped my perspective on that. Now, obviously, that was an example because I know that a team needs different structures and functions, and everybody's role is important. But the goal is that our job as coaches, her job as a teacher, is to find them an opportunity to excel. It's not on them necessarily. To a degree, it is. They got to put in the hard work. They have to put in the time. They have to train. They have to, do their part. But if they're doing their part, my job as the coach is to put them in, to find them an opportunity for them to be successful because they did their part. Now it's my turn to do my part. And I found myself sometimes almost made like, oh, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So again, conversation with my wife found me coaching just one side of that person, the physical side. And this is like, again, like I mentioned, this is why it's important to have that balance of a female perspective and a male perspective. So that's something that I found to be very important is coaching that whole person, coaching the 360 athlete. Because yes, I want them to be good at sports. I want them to succeed at their level. I want them to maximize their athletic potential for sure. But I also want them to be succeeding in the classroom. I want them to be succeeding with their friends. I want them to have positive, healthy relationships with their peers. I want them to be in a great family bond with the family that they live with. I want them to, all of these things. But I'm not saying I have this figured out. I'm saying I'm calling myself out. I'm pointing the finger at myself because the last year I was more concerned with the results. I was more concerned with physical. I was more concerned with that. And it was in this conversation with my wife where she helped me to realize, dude, your perspective's a little off. Great. You have great athletes. You have athletes that are doing what they can do. You're winning some games. You're having a little bit mild success. But you could be doing more if you focused on the bigger picture. So God bless my wife, as she should. God bless her anyway. But God bless her for having that tough conversation with me because she helped me to realize. So it got me thinking. Well, then what does that matter? What can I do as a coach? Obviously, it's not my job to be my player's father. They have one. Whether they have a relationship with him or not, they already have an earthly father. Then they have a potentially heavenly father, depending on what the relationship is like with the Lord. But how can my experience as a kid who grew up no dad, single mom, lived and died by what his coaches said and thought, how can I take this and begin to apply it into how I coach? And the starting point is that, I found one of my favorite verses. And one of my favorite verses it's Psalm 68, 4, 5, and 6. It says, Psalm 68, 4, sing praises to God and to his name. Sing loud praises to him who rides the clouds. His name is the Lord. Rejoice in his presence. And verse 5 is actually the verse that I really wanted, 5 and 6. Father to the fatherless, defender of widows, this is God, whose dwelling is holy. God places the lonely in families. He sets the prisoners free and gives them joy. But he makes the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land. Father to the fatherless. This is God whose dwelling is holy. So that's the kind of mindset that I now have about myself, right? I don't know my earthly father. I've never had a relationship with him. My mom did an amazing job trying to fill both roles. But in those moments when I was younger and growing up and struggled and was wrestling with, why don't I have a dad? All these things. This idea that God is my father. He is a father to the fatherless. This is God whose dwelling is holy. That's who I have access to right now. And for my basketball players, for the soccer team that I help with, that might be their only experience of actually having a relationship with a godly man, or even God, is how I conduct myself. So as a coach, as a follower of Jesus, am I coaching with this perspective? Am I coaching with the perspective of, what if I'm the only representation of Jesus that my players get to see? Yeah, I would love to win a league title. It's tough because in the league that we're in, we have a lot of strong opponents, specifically just in our division. That would be great if we did. But more importantly, what would it be like if they realized, even if they don't have a relationship with their earthly father or their family dynamic is one that is non-traditional, that they have access to the God of the universe who desires to be a father to the fatherless, defender of widows. This is God whose dwelling is holy. God places the lonely in families. He sets the prisoner free and gives them joy. This is our God. Is that the same God I'm reflecting when I'm on the sidelines, desperate for a win, yelling, screaming, and, you know, I don't cuss. I don't cuss at my players. I don't cuss at the refs. I don't cuss in general. But I'm sure I sound like a lunatic sometimes because I get frustrated. I'm competitive, right? But is that what's being reflected? Is the fact that there is a father to the fatherless, that these young men, maybe, I don't know their all story. I don't know if they all have the same, that maybe some of them might have grown up in the same situation I do, right? So as a coach, what can we do? Practically, what can we do to get to know our players better? One thing that I learned from my coaching mentor is doing things as a team outside of practice or outside of games, team dinners, team outings, things like that, because you get to see your players outside of their environment, outside of, what makes them valuable as an athlete. So, like, you have a team dinner, you're hanging out, hey, so and so is kind of funny. Or we're having a conversation and, oh, this so and so, this is what's going on in their lives. So, I think a lot of us as coaches might know that, but I think it's worth just making a point to say that get to know your players outside of your sports environment, whether it's a field sport, whether it's an indoor sport, whether it's whatever it might be intentional with the time and get to know them. And I think once you get to know them, that's when you begin to see, hey, wait a minute, what is their home life like? What is their family life like? What is their, are they dating somebody? Are they in a relationship? Is it a healthy relationship? And again, these are things that maybe that's going too far. And some of you out there might be thinking, no, I'm just a coach. This is just my job to, get them prepared for the next game and do the best that they can. And maybe that's what your job is. But I'm encouraging you, I'm telling you, as a kid that grew up without a dad, as a guy now who's the stepdad to two teenage boys, that I know for sure that I want their coaches to be pouring into them more than just X's and O's. I have one of my assistant coaches. I have two assistant coaches that help me, and then our JV coach helps me as well. So I have three assistant coaches, Two of them are dads of players or former players, and one is just a guy in the community who all the kids love and who just loves the sport and who just literally he volunteers his time to be there. So he doesn't get paid. He actually has to pay a little bit because he has to get background checked and he has to do the state certification. So he's losing money to be around my players. And he doesn't even have a son. He has got a daughter. So he'll never, ever coach. You know what I mean? He'll never be, it's not like there's a boy coming up that he'll get to coach one day. His child plays on the girls' side. and she's young. So, but the thing I love about those guys, and it's really hard not to say their names, but I don't want to do that. The things that I love about those guys is they, yes, they're there to help me, but they're also there to pour in to these kids as well. So it's another set of positive feedback. It's another set of eyes. It's another set of, it's more than just about how good they are at a sport or how good they're not at a sport. And are we perfect? Of course not. But being fathers, being in the community. They're people who I don't even know where their relationship is faith-wise, but either way, like they have a great care and feel for these, and they have a great relationship with these players because they care about them, because it's more than just the sport. And that's something that I find to be very, very, very cool. That is an environment that I did not experience as a player. So already some things are changing because as the head of the program, I get to kind of dictate what happens downward. But the thing that I think is most important though is it's so easy for us as coaches, and it's never easy during tryouts. Let's put it this way. It's never easy during tryouts because, especially if you're at a larger school, there's going to be kids who try out and they're at the end of the day, they're objectively just not good enough. That's tough. But how do you have that conversation with them so that when you have that conversation with them and you tell them they're not going to make the team and you cut them, how do you have that in a way that doesn't affect their value as humans? You know, that's the part that I've never been able to truly probably I don't want to say I've never been able to do it. I feel like I do it. I feel like I try to do it the best I can, but no matter how well I do it, it's probably not going to land the way that I'd like it to. Because at that age, when you're 15, 16, 17, your whole identity is in maybe what your friends are doing, what you're a part of, and then all of a sudden to be told it's not going to work, thank you so much for trying, you're just not good enough, right? How do you have that conversation? And in talking with my wife and in talking with my counselor who's a Christian who I meet with every 2 weeks, one of the things that he's encouraged me to say is in stress, and I actually try to do this with my players whether they get cut or whether they're still on the team, is ask yourself two questions. And those two questions are, am I okay and how am I doing? So the am I okay question is a fundamental core question with am I okay in the sense that, you know, am I good? Not am I good at a sport, not am I, is my worth here, but, I am okay because I am made in the image of God. I am okay because he created me with a purpose. If I have a relationship with God, he's my father to the fatherless. He's the defender of widows. I am who I am because that's who God says I am. So am I okay? Yes. I'm okay because God says I'm okay. That's the first answer to that question. Now, that is something that whether you make a team, whether you get cut from a team, whether you're in a relationship, whether your girlfriend breaks up with you, no matter what happens, that is an undeniable fact that is always true. If you have a relationship with the Lord, you are okay because God says you're okay. You were made in the image of God. You were created with a purpose. These are all things that are reaffirming that you are okay, no matter what is happening around you. The problem is that our society does not equate those two things. Our society looks at it and says, well, wait a minute, you're not okay because so and so broke up with you. You're not okay because you didn't make the basketball team. You're not okay because, you failed your math test again. You're not okay because your parents got divorced. You're not okay. And those are all things that are major, major deals. But as soon as we start to begin to ask ourselves and doubt the fact that, am I okay? That's when we begin to lean and say, I don't think I'm okay. So then we try to find things to make us feel okay. And that gets into a whole nother conversation. So that's the first question I try to, and I'm going to do a better job of that going into next basketball season, is instilling with them if I have to have those tough conversations. One, you are okay. Might not feel like you are, but you're okay. The second question is one that can change and fluctuate is how am I doing? So let's say basketball tryouts are happening. Okay, you didn't make any of your times on your sprints. You're a little bit out of shape. You weren't able to do the minimum amount of, free throws that we expect. You weren't able to, fill in the blank, whatever your measurables are. You can take those measurables and remind them as a human, as a person, that they're good, they're okay. But their ability to perform the task at hand, how are you doing? How am I doing? Not so great. And here's why. You couldn't make any of the sprint times. You couldn't do any of the fill in X, Y, and Z. You couldn't do the amount of pull-ups. You couldn't do the right mile time. These are all things that are saying, how you doing? You're not doing great, but you're still okay. Because I think if you're able to separate those two things, the am I okay is their value, is their worth as a human. You never, ever, ever want to impact this. And sometimes when you address the how am I doing portion and you're able to say to them, listen, you're not doing this, this, and this, it might begin to affect them over here in the am I okay stage. But the reality is they're still okay because they were created for a purpose. God has a plan for them. God knew them before they were born. He knitted them together in their mother's womb. There's a plan. They're okay. Whether they're making free throws, whether they're missing jump shots, whether they're running mile times, those things are all still true. God still has a plan. That's something that I encourage people to begin to realize is how you do doesn't define who you are. Those are two separate questions. If you've listened to our podcast before, you've heard Greg talk about it on the Coach's Corner. This is something that you do. It's not who you are. And that I think is the biggest thing when you're having those tough conversations. So that actually is something that I just feel really important, feel really led to say, because I think it's really important, is when you are finding yourself as a coach, the role that you have is so much more important than just the wins and the losses. If that's all you're caring about, maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it won't. Maybe you'll have kids that are scared of you. Maybe you'll have kids that like you because you're transactionally beneficial to them. But I encourage you at the end of the day, as a person, me, myself, who grew up without a dad, I put these coaches in my world on a pedestal as a male role model in my life. Now, they didn't ask for that. That was me putting them there. But I bet had they known how it was affecting me, I would like to think that it would have changed a little bit of how they made me feel about myself. So I'm challenging you, guys, by guys, for guys. Maybe you're an athlete just like me, who's now a coach, or maybe you're still an athlete in high school who's listening to this. I encourage you, the athlete out there, how you're doing versus are you okay? You are okay. How you're doing might change, right? But you are okay. It's when we begin to doubt that am I okay stage that trouble creeps in, that we start to look for things to make us feel okay, like drugs, like relationships, like things on the internet, like other things that make us feel good for the moment. If we start turning to those things to make us feel okay, that's when trouble creeps in. So know that you are okay. For all of those reasons that we said before, that God created you. He made you in his image. He has a plan for you. He knew you before you were born. He knitted you together in your mother's womb. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So all of those things are true. You're okay. Your performance might not be, but who you are, your self-worth, that is okay because God establishes that, not man. So if you make your team, great. Doesn't make you any better than anybody else. If you don't make your team, that's okay because it doesn't make you worse than anybody else. So learn to separate those two. How am I doing versus am I okay? And the second thing is, as coaches, I would encourage you to really take inventory of the fact that you get the chance to mentor and shape the minds, the hearts, and the souls of these players that you get to work with, whether you want to or not. So whether you're the kind of coach that cares about their whole person, you're still impacting that whole person. So I encourage you to make sure that you're doing what you can do to do the best for them, not the best for you. Right? Because that's easy coach speak. Yeah, I want the best for the kids, the student athlete, student comes first. It's so easy to get caught up talking the coach speak that what we forget is that we actually have to mean it. So that's kind of my challenge is with Father's Day around the corner. It just was something that landed on my heart. I wanted to share it with you with my own experiences as a coach and now an FCA. and as a stepdad and as a new husband, like all of these thoughts are just kind of jumbled in my brain. And I'd like to think that they came out kind of eloquently here. And if they didn't, I apologize. This is my first solo podcast. So, one thing I'm learning is it's not easy to talk to nobody. But I thank you all so much for your time. I'm excited to see what happens. For those of you who coach, just know that you're prayed for, whether you know who I am or not. That's one of my passions is coaches need all the prayer in the world because their job is so important, not because of the sports piece, but because of the role they play on the young people that they get to work with. So I pray you all have a great rest of your day and join us next week. Every new episode drops Tuesday, and we'll talk to you guys then.